Now, do you think you can understand some Portuguese without actually knowing the language? Well, if you are familiar with another Romance language, the answer to the question is yes. It's very likely that you can understand certain words, phrases, or sentences in Portuguese, even if you've never heard or studied the language before. Now, why is that? All Romance languages derive from Latin, the language of the Roman Empire. The major Roman languages are French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. All these share a number of features, including some grammatical structures and basic vocabulary, despite variations in pronunciation and intonation. Let's look at some examples. So in Spanish, you say, Hola, ¿cómo estás? In Portuguese, you say, Olá, como estás? In French, you say, Mon nom est. In Portuguese, o meu nome é. And yes, in French, this isn't very used. You usually say, Je m'appelle, but, well, you can still see the similarities. And finally, vivere e amare, viver e amar, live and love. There are numerous words that have identical or similar spellings and meanings in all Romance languages. Said, for instance, differs mostly when it comes to pronunciation. Freedom and it depends in turn are spelled and pronounced with slight differences, and the meaning remains the same. The similarities between Romance languages have their pitfalls, though. That is where false cognates come in, informally known as false friends, which effectively points to the idea of deceitful, of a word that's unreliable. These are words with identical spellings and or pronunciations, but different meanings. That's the case with polvo, which means dust, and polvo, which means octopus. So if you say, my room is full of polvo, well, it means something quite different in Portuguese. Burro in Spanish and Portuguese means donkey, and in Italian it means butter. Pourtant in French means yet, whereas in Portuguese, portanto means so. Let's now look beyond Romance languages. Here are some of my favorite false friends between Portuguese and English. We have lunch and lanche. But lanche in Portuguese, it means snack. Beef is pronounced exactly the same way in Portuguese, beef, but it means steak rather than cow meat, carne de vaca. Ordinary means vulgar, whereas ordinário means vulgar. Actually is realmente, whereas atualmente means nowadays. The verb to push is particularly tricky for native speakers of Portuguese, and it often leads to unfortunate situations with doors, where when it says to push, we inevitably pull. So pull is puxar, whereas pular means to jump. Pasta is massa, whereas pasta is a folder or a briefcase. This is a favorite of mine. We have fish, peixe, and fiche. Fiche means cool or nice in everyday, informal European Portuguese. In Brazil, legal is used instead of fiche. Now, legal is spelled exactly the same as legal in English, and it has the same meaning in English and in Portuguese. So when someone from Brazil says she's legal, they probably mean that she's nice, she's cool. The connections between English and Portuguese go well beyond false cognates and into the wonderful realm of loanwords. The verb to embarrass comes from the Portuguese embaraçar and has retained the same meaning. It is, however, an example of a false cognate between Portuguese and Spanish. The verb is prone to rather embarrassing, pun intended, misunderstandings. When I say estou embaraçada, I mean I'm embarrassed, or je suis embarrassée in French, not estoy embarazada, which means I'm pregnant. Veranda comes from the Portuguese varanda, which means balcony. Zebra comes from zebra, and fetish is a funny one. It comes from the Portuguese feitiço, which means spell or charm. So it has a very different meaning, intimately related to magic, and it entered the English language via the French fétiche. The encounters of the Portuguese explorers during the so-called Age of Discoveries with different peoples and cultures around the globe led to the fascinating and long-lasting legacy of Portuguese on many languages. Now hit the pause button and go through these Indonesian words. Can you spot the similarities? Many Japanese words come from Portuguese too. We have, for instance, bread, pão, pan, flask, frasco, which means laboratory flask in Japanese, and it means flask or any type of glass recipient in Portuguese. Capa is an old-fashioned term for raincoat, deriving from the Portuguese capa, and it retained the same meaning. Nowadays, the preferred term in Japan is raincoat, from the English raincoat. Botan, button, and igirisu means the United Kingdom in Japanese and comes from the Portuguese word for English. Finally, we have copo, which means copo in Portuguese, which is a glass, as in a glass of water. As you'll remember, Portuguese is an official language of Timor-Leste, but so is Tetum. The country's name in Tetum is Timor-Loroçai, which means rising sun. Look at how similar the parts of the day are in Portuguese and Tetum. The words for thank you, obrigado, and excuse me, com licença, are also identical. Over the centuries, Portuguese has also been influenced by a number of languages other than Latin. One of the most striking examples is the relationship between Portuguese and Arabic, the result of 5 centuries of Moorish rule, which lasted from the 8th to the 13th century. When the Muslim Moors arrived in Portugal from northern Africa, the region was ruled by the Visigoths, a Germanic people who ruled between 418 and 711. Portuguese inherited hundreds of words from Arabic, most of which are still in use. Now here are some examples. The Portuguese açougue, butcher, still very much used in Brazil, but now old-fashioned in Portugal, comes from açougue, meaning market or fair. Originally, the term can be traced to Aramaic and further back to Akkadian, an extinct language spoken in ancient Mesopotamia from the 3rd millennium BCE. Azeit, olive oil, derives from the Arabic zait, or more precisely from azeit. Aceituna in Spanish, meaning olive, comes from zaytun, or azeitun, the olive. Both words in turn hark back to the Aramaic zeta. If a word in Portuguese starts with al, for instance, it's most likely borrowed from Arabic. Other words of Arabic origin often begin with an X or ensh, E-N-X. Alfas comes from has or al-has. Asukar comes from asukar, which in turn comes from Persian shakar and from the Sanskrit sharkara. Al-Fureka, a medusa, comes from al-Hureka, and sharab comes from sharab. Now here are some fun facts about the linguistic legacy of Portuguese. So there are about 20 Creole languages originating from Portuguese. Until recently, about a third of Luxembourg's population was of Portuguese descent. The name of the West African country, Gabon, originates from the Portuguese gabão, meaning cloak, which is roughly the shape that the early explorers gave to the estuary of the Como River by the capital of Libreville. The word marmalade is borrowed from the Portuguese marmelada, which is traditionally made with quince, marmelo.
Thank you very much for watching this short video about the Portuguese language and Portuguese culture. I hope you've enjoyed it. Obrigada and goodbye. Adeus. Ciao.